Welcome to the Computing There I Was podcast. I am Richie Bilak, your host. Today I will be speaking to Barbara Gilman. Barbara started her career as an engineer at IBM and then was an independent consultant for a while and ended her career working for Coca-Cola. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Hi, welcome to Computing There I Was podcast. Today I'm speaking to Barbara Gilman. Hi, Barbara. How are you?
Hello, Richie.
So I always begin with a question, and how did you get started in computing?
The long and the short, but when I was in college, in Queens College, there were no data processing courses at all at Queens. I think there were some at some other schools at that time, but not at Queens. I volunteered during registration to, help with the registration process, and there were punch cards that.
Right.
We didn't use any of that equipment. We were just using the cards and putting them in these big sorting frames, bins, little cubby holes. But I never saw any machines, obviously. There were some in the background, but I knew nothing about it. So I started out as I was going to be a biology major.
Okay.
And I had to start with chemistry and then biology, and it quickly became apparent that I was allergic to formaldehyde, and I would never get through the course. So I said, okay, test tubes look exciting. I was really naive about everything. I'll major in chemistry. Got the freshman chemistry award, and then I got into qualitative analysis, where everybody else in the class was bringing their unknown chemistry samples home to their professional relatives and friends and it was all memorization. I am not good at memorization. So
Right.
I had to drop that course, and I thought, now what? So took out the New York Times, looked in the want ads, and saw for math majors there were a lot of job offers for programming, and they were going to do the training. And they were paying good money, $5,000 or $6,000 a year. So I thought, okay, I'll major in math because that's easy. There's no labs. It's just logic. And besides, in the 7th grade, my seatmate had whispered to me during a math class, math is my favorite subject. And I thought about it. Did I have a favorite subject? I said to her, math is my favorite subject too.
Oh.
So I majored in math. The day after graduation, the head of the math department called me up and offered me a job teaching math. And I said, nope, I've already accepted a job with IBM.
Wow.
I was recruited on campus. I was terrified. I had no idea what data processing was. IBM was some scary big thing in the sky to me. And I thought, well, I can always quit and get some other job. But I hope it's not as hard as physics, because IBM was perfect for me. So that's where I started. I was a systems engineer with IBM. They trained me on everything, and it started out with unit record equipment.
Where was the office? Was it
in Queens, Regal Park?
Queens?
Regal Park. I had to get a car. When I was interviewed, they said, you'll need a car to go to the different customers. And I said, well, I don't have my license yet, but I'll buy one before June. And I did that. I got my license and I bought a car so that I could have the job.
What year was this?
1962.
Wow.
And that hiring manager said to me, you're very lucky to be hired because our experience with women is that we hire them, we spend a lot of money training them, and within a year they get married and go off to have babies. But their practice was to hire the top math grad that they could get from Queens College for the Regal Park office every year. And I was Miss 1962. Fortunately, one of my best friends, who had been valedictorian in high school and college and junior high, went to grad school, or she would have had the job.
Oh,
I was the second highest math grad.
So what was the training like? So what did they teach you?
Well, the first was accounting machines, wiring control panels. I have a 407 control panel in my basement. Something that's...
What is that?
I should have brought it up here.
I'll look for a picture and put a link in the notes.
Okay. They are boards with holes in it, and you have wires with a plug at each end that you push into the hole. So you start out with, you have an 80-column punch card, and there's 80 columns, so you have 80 wires, and you know that these 6 are the account number, and this is the amount, and the, whatever you design into it, and you wire them into either counters, which are really accumulators,
right.
and you can add this one to that, and then you have output, which is paper. So you have 132 positions of output, and after doing your calculations, you wire the output from the calculators or from the input, like the name field, and you put it on a printer. So there was the punch, the key punches. There was sorters. I don't know if you've seen sorters.
I haven't seen sorters.
Oh, you've got to look at that, where you have a stack of cards coming in, and they go into one of, not 26, even though we have 26 letters and a bunch of numbers, but some number of slots, and then you take each slot and you put them back and sort them again, and finally you've got the cards in the order that you want to print your invoices with.
Wow.
And you put them into a collator where you can collate them based on account number with an address card or some other information. And what was the machine after they were calculators that you could do things with, and then finally the accounting machine, which printed whatever your output was going to be. So that was first. Then I was trained on 1401 computers. I missed the 305s, which were right before me, but I was installing 1401s to replace 305 Ramac machines, which had these enormous cylinders. I mean, I don't know if I could have gotten my arms around how big this cylinder was. I never understood them. I was just installing the replacement systems.
Right.
But I started with machine language, SPS, symbolic programming language. We were still writing in machine language, but, you could use an A for add instead of 12 or whatever the add code was. And we probably had field names, but it was really symbolic machine language. Then we went to Autocoder, which was...
What was Autocoder?
Autocoder was a step up where there was a compiler, and you did have field names, and it was a little more like real programming.
So it's more like an assembler or something.
Yeah, but not quite. Eventually I got to assembler. But it was a lot of different steps because that was what was happening then. So, yeah.
What kind of applications were those?
So, when I was working for IBM, which was less than 5 years, I started in Rego Park. I did get married within a couple of years to somebody in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So I transferred to the York, Pennsylvania office, and then he was transferred from Lancaster to Reading. So I got a job in Philadelphia with a desk in Reading. I was considered the outstate banking group. So while I was working for IBM in New York, in Rego Park, I worked on a lot of little things. I did something in alloy rods in Long Island City, where the man interrupted the conversation with me and the IBM salesman and said, "How old are you?" I mean, could anyone ask that to? And I said 21. He said, "Well, you don't look older than 16." But okay, so applications. The major thing I did was an installment loan application for a bank in Reading, Pennsylvania.
Right.
Reading Trust Company. And at that time, IBM sold equipment for an application and sent their systems engineers to develop the application. So that's what I did. So they sold this bank to Reading Trust Company. I went in there to develop the application from their manual procedures. And then IBM offered it to several other banks in Pennsylvania, where I went and modified it for each bank's personal individual things. And my favorite story about Reading Trust Company is going around with their vice president that was in charge of installment loans. And we had this loan application that people started with. I don't know if it had 3 or 5 carbon copies. And we went from person to person. What do you do with this paper? And what do you do with that paper? Copy. We finally get to the last copy. And we go to this woman and, okay, now what do you do with this last page? She stands up, she opens a cabinet, and on the very top shelf there's a box. She says, I put the last copy in that box. And when what happens? I don't know, because I've been doing that for 20 years and we have several boxes. No one's ever asked for that copy.
That's very funny.
I wrote so many. I wrote a payroll system on a 4K, 4,000 byte, 1401 in assembler, because you can't write more efficiently with that. I went at a sausage company. A sausage company. I wrote a system to optimize their recipe for each run. So we would have the recipes. We need between 5 and 10% of this ingredient. We need and here are the prices of each ingredient. So now what would be the best, most economical recipe? So minimize the cost for each sausage run based on ingredients. That was fun. I did a classroom scheduling on a 1620 in Fortran.
So when did you start using Fortran?
I actually didn't use it much, but I was attending a class, IBM run, on scientific programming. Right. And we had projects, and somehow I connected to this guy who had a real assignment to do this scheduling program, and he said, if you want to partner with me, I'm going to do a real thing, not just an exercise. And I learned Fortran on the spot for that. I also, all of the languages that I learned were self-taught. I taught COBOL to engineers at Armstrong Corporation, the flooring company. Mm-hmm. I was 2 weeks ahead of them reading the manuals. And I was up there teaching them COBOL. Yeah.
Well, that's the best way to learn. Teach it. Right?
Yes. But they just sent me out. You have to teach COBOL. They said, but figure it out.
Yeah, when I learned COBOL, we had like a self-study course at Brooklyn College. So basically, they gave you a book and a bunch of assignments.
Right. Well, you could do that with COBOL. 1400s, 1401, 1402 eventually had tape reels. So instead of bringing in a drawer full of cards, that was your program. And having to do that every time, you could save your program on tape and then just have modification cards. I remember, and it must have been a 1400 program, having switches on the front of the machine, little toggle switches that I was using to modify code in the program when I found a bug. And if you put me in front of that today, I wouldn't know what to do. But I remember doing these it was eight switches, and you somehow got to that address and you changed the code because it was a mistake or a key punch error.
So that's how you debug, basically?
Well, that was at that level, yeah. Other times, you'd see an error, you go through your list and figure it out.
Did you have like crash dumps?
Oh, yes. Yeah, core dumps. Yes. And so you could see what was where. Put stops in programs, stop at this point so I can see where we are.
So when did you get past the 1401?
Well, eventually I got to bigger 1440, 1460, where I used COBOL and RPG. report generator. Again, all sorts of, and also at the same time, I was working on 360s and 370s in assembly language and COBOL. So I know there was an American bank, there was a different bank in Pennsylvania, that I did something for them on the 360 in assembly language. I didn't enjoy that as much as,
how come?
I don't know, I guess because I had all this experience on the 1400s
Right.
that I liked better. So
I guess the 360, the instruction set was different, right?
right, and it was back to assembly language. I had already gotten used to COBOL and RPG and easier things. And all this, again, was in less than 5 years, because in less than 5 years, I was 6 months pregnant. And IBM had a strict rule, 6 months pregnant and you're out. Now, there was one, I think she was a secretary, who lied about how pregnant she was, finally stopped at the end of her 8th month on a Friday, said, okay, I'm 6 months pregnant, went home and had the baby the next morning, weighing some very good amount for 2 months early. And the manager knew he'd been tricked. But at the end of 6 months, when I left, my ex-husband at that time decided that my job at IBM was much more interesting than the truck leasing company, the family truck leasing company he was working for. And he, with a lot of my help, got a job with IBM as a salesperson on Long Island, and we moved while I was still pregnant to Long Island. So that interrupted my career.
Right.
2 years later, I was banging my head against the wall, even though my dream was to be a stay-at-home mom, and I started working on contracts. Through my old office, Regal Park had closed. A lot of the people had moved out to wherever, Garden City, thank you.
Oh,
Garden City, that's where the office was. And so they knew me. They knew me from when I had been, and so they started sending me out to their clients. My first client was Lafayette Radio in Syosset, because one of their programmers was in a mental hospital temporarily, and they didn't want to replace him. They wanted to hold the job, so I was perfect. I could come in. I was a temp and something. But that was unusual because I joined a team of people doing whatever they were doing for Lafayette. After that, I was always a kind of independent software developer, where I came in and did the whole thing. I wasn't a team member. I usually came in and did the whole job: design, program, test, install, train, etc., document.
Did you then get into some of those methodologies that were around, top-down design and all that stuff?
Those systems to do? No, I was always, no, never was. I think they were using that at Lafayette. They had some kind of thing, but we all developed different programs in the system.
How large were those systems? Like, let's say, in terms of lines of code, or
if I talk about later, so chronologically, when that baby was 7, my ex-husband was transferred to Atlanta.
Okay.
All right, where I was now going to become a tennis star. That didn't last. So within a couple of years, I was back working. And my 2 main clients were IBM again and Coca-Cola. Oh. And so my 2 biggest career development projects were one for IBM and one for Coca-Cola. The one for Coca-Cola was a financial management system that was installed in about 70 locations in 30 countries. It did order entry, accounts payable, accounts receivable, inventory, bill of material, general ledger. It was huge, and it was developed over a period of 20 years. We kept adding applications, and we went from 1440 to 1460 to System 34. 38. We went from RPG and eventually switched it to COBOL. And for all those years, I would work 9 months and develop a module, and then I would be doing something else for some other client, like IBM and many others. And then they'd call me up, we're ready to do whatever. And I'd come in again, and people would say, who developed these packages? And they would say, a Dunwoody housewife, because that's where I lived, in Dunwoody. And at first, I only worked 3 days a week so I could play tennis 2 days. Except if it rained, I would go into work. And then I realized in the morning, on tennis mornings, I would listen, hoping to hear rain. And I said, okay, that's it. After that season, I worked 5 days a week till 3 o'clock because I had 2 kids.
Right.
And eventually, they could be trusted. I gave them a key, and they came home, called me up, and I came home at 5. But with Coke, they kept offering me a permanent job, and I kept saying no. Until the last 3 years, I accepted a job, probably that was 1998. And for 3 years, I traveled the world 40% of the time.
Oh, nice.
Installing these systems that I had never seen installed because they were not used domestically, only internationally. So I got to, Europe, Asia, Africa, South America,
wow,
all over, training, installing, making local modifications to the local needs or connecting them to their local systems or other systems that we didn't have. I did the conversion for all of their European locations when they converted to the euro. And all of these packages had multiple language and multiple currency.
Right. Do you speak other languages?
Not
French?
At all.
No?
Not at all. I had 7 years of French. We always traveled one technical person, me, and one financial person. And mostly I traveled with a young man a week younger than my younger Southern Barry. And he also had French in school. And we could speak French to each other and understand each other. But when we tried to speak French to anyone in France, that didn't work. No other language. The Coke people all spoke English, even if they were local.
Right. Yeah, I worked for a French company for a while, but everybody spoke English.
Yeah, now everywhere they spoke English. And they escorted us to wherever we needed to go. And on the weekends, because usually these were 2 to 4 week trips, the weekends we were tourists and got to go on safari in Kenya and ride elephants in Thailand and horses in South America. It was great.
Yeah.
So for IBM, I wrote a meeting management system, which they used to run both recognition events, the 100% clubs, the golden circles.
Recognition events
and executive conferences where they would have top executives from various companies come to a meeting with a lot of IBM presentations. So the biggest part of that I was most proud of is these executives would be offered a menu of breakout sessions, and the hotel where we would run would have various size rooms that handled different numbers of seats, and we had speakers that were running the sessions that had their own availability and time slots. And I took all that and scheduled the rooms, the executives, the speakers, and I never had to say sorry. You asked for G and L, and they conflict. I always managed to make it work that everybody got all of their sessions that they wanted. I mean, they were limited to 6 or 8 or whatever it was. And so I did all that scheduling with my own logic. I mean, I didn't use anything. And then printed the itineraries for each year that you go to room 400, whatever, at 2 o'clock. And we did rooming not for the executives, but for the recognition events If you were just a salesman, you had to room with somebody, so we had smoke. At that time, you could smoke. So we didn't put non-smokers with smokers, and we had all kinds of parameters of who could room with who, and we did that. And it was a huge package. And I actually went on site to run the meeting with the packages. And some of those sites were international also. One in Sydney, Australia. I went to Brussels, Paris, some places with IBM, yes. Those two, and they were used over many years, and each meeting had different changes to the package, enhancements, or everyone gets a private room, we're not using that anymore. Yeah, so those were the highlights of the packages. But I did a lot of smaller things. I did a food cost system that was marketed to restaurants, where again they put in their recipes and the ingredients and the costs, similar to the sausage,
right?
But they could figure out what each menu item was costing them, and that was marketed. And this was not for IBM. This was for some local company that developed various things.
I'm curious. So besides Fortran and COBOL, what other languages did you have?
Well, RPG.
RPG, right?
The meeting management system was a PC system, so I was using compiled BASIC.
Oh, okay.
And eventually I used C also on the PC. I developed several things in C. But at some point in the 80s, my kids were programming at the local Radio Shack on TRS-80s. They wanted one, and then when IBM announced the PC, my ex was still working for IBM. No, we're getting an IBM. They were not happy. They wanted at that time an Apple, a Mac, because their friends had it and they were already programming over there. We got this PC and my kids started programming in BASIC. I didn't know BASIC. So finally I said, okay, I have to pick this up. So I picked up the book and learned that, and then IBM wanted this system. And there was another machine, 5120. It was some kind of a desktop computer that was programmed in BASIC that I did some systems for IBM. I did quite a few different things for IBM, but the meeting management was the big thing. I did a people resource tracking system, a project management system that took in the people and the tasks and the priorities and scheduled their projects.
So before we get into that, tell me about tennis.
I was never a star. I played on a team. I enjoyed it, but not as much as programming. Not as much.
Yeah, I played tennis a little bit, but it's pretty bad, so just for fun.
Well, I'm trying to remember, what was the acronym for the tennis association here? I want to say Alpha, but it was something.
ATP or something? ATP?
No, it was longer than that.
Okay.
Anyway, and they had teams all over, and you had practice on Tuesdays and games on Thursday, and we had 5 matches each time, and you were either ranked. So your team was either A, B, or C, and then within that you were A, 1, 2, 3, 4. I was always 4 or 5 on my team. So my partner and I paid the lower level people on that opposition team. And it was fun, but I wasn't as skilled. I don't think I had the eye-hand coordination that I should have had, or whatever.
Well, to reach the top of tennis, you have to be quite talented and committed.
I'm much better at hiking. Hiking, I still do. Every Tuesday is hiking day. So my username on a lot of websites is Georgia Hiker.
So you mentioned PCs. So
yes.
You started working on PCs pretty much like in the 80s?
By the late 80s, 90s, I was doing half and half because Coke was all 34, 36, 38, and IBM was all PC. at one point, and I was thinking about this yesterday, how did I do this? They didn't have network software, but yet we needed to have a network where we could be operating multiple PCs and all going into one database. So first of all, the database, I had to create all the logic. There were no packages for that, and I bought something that I must have read about in PC Magazine, the first year of which is still in my basement, ISAM routines, ISAM, index. You're familiar with that?
Yes.
So I purchased that package and the right to use it in my developed software. So that's how I created my databases. And I somehow remember I programmed the network logic to communicate between our PCs at these meetings.
How did they connect?
I don't remember. But I know I did it. I don't think I could do now what I had done then. Even the most recent stuff I did, because when I told you I finally worked at Coke, if you sat me down at that computer that I used at the last day at Coke, I would not be able to just dive in and do what I was doing. That was 25 years ago.
Well, I mean, things change as well.
Well, I'm saying even if it hadn't, I did a vehicle rental and long-term leasing thing for a leasing company here. I did a church donation accounting system for the Southern Baptist Convention. I did a magazine subscription thing for IBM. I mean, there were just so many different systems and applications.
Did you get involved in the internet?
That was after I retired.
Oh, really?
I didn't have email till after I retired.
Wow.
I retired in 2001. I didn't know I was retiring. Coke was trying to downsize. Right. They begged me not to take it, but I qualified. And it was, they gave you 3 years extra.
Right, like a severance package.
Yeah, there was severance package. And I thought, you know what? These systems that are all over this world, they were, at that point, some of them starting to be replaced with SAP.
Right.
And so I was going to need to change jobs within Coke. And they had agreed they would do that. And I wanted to get into, what was it called, Advanced Basic at that time. And that was something I wanted to do. But in the end, I took the package, thinking I'm going to go back to freelancing and consulting. But life got in the way. First, my mother became ill, and I had brought her to Atlanta from Florida. She became ill. She passed. By the time I recovered from that and cleaning out and whatever, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes.
Oof.
That took 6 months to get under control. I don't think I ever could have done that international traveling, even though I have traveled for pleasure since then internationally, but that would have been a real challenge at that time. And then I was divorced, and then I reconnected with a very old flame who I've now been married to for 20 years.
Wow.
So I never got back. After I left Coke, I never did another thing except I have an Excel spreadsheet that does my income taxes. So that's my data processing now.
So you haven't programmed for fun once you left.
And I
regret. Are you interested
that.
At all?
At this point, I can barely keep up with the tasks I need to do and all the medical appointments. And I'd have to learn new languages, new everything. I'd like to do that, but I can't clear the desk.
Well, one thing you might, if you feel like it, is look at the AI stuff that's available today. I don't know. Are you aware of it?
I'm aware of it slightly. I forget which of my sons we were online, or were they here? And they kind of said, they typed in, write a program in COBOL to do such and such and such. Woo, that thing just That was shocking.
Right. There's all these systems, they're called large language model. And people do this thing called vibe coding, where you describe in English what you want, and the AI kind of creates the program. It's most often right, but sometimes not.
Right, but it saves a lot of time. Then you go through and clean it up or debug it or whatever.
So if you were advising somebody who's trying to get to the field today, what would you say?
I've been out of this for 25 years. Even when you think of my whole career, it was not a traditional anything. I was not in data processing departments. I was not employed really, except for 3 years. I wouldn't know what to say.
Well, I think it's an interesting career path, being kind of like independent consultant. The fact that you were able to always have projects, how did you manage?
First of all, when I was in New York, after I left, my ex-husband went to work for IBM, and he was connected with the office, and he could say, hey, you all remember my wife? Then when I moved to Atlanta again, my ex was working for IBM, and he connected me with someone who was already doing projects for IBM and Coca-Cola. He connected me to Coca-Cola. Then I joined ISCA, Independent Software Consultant Association. Some guy here in Atlanta had formed this association for people like me, and he would try to find contracts and deal them out. Was I secretary or treasurer of that? I guess I was a secretary in that organization. And so I got some contracts there, like the truck leasing and several others. But the biggies I got because of my original job with IBM and those connections and my ex-husband's connection later.
Right.
I don't know how to do it now.
You were good and you had connection. If you build your reputation.
Yes. Within IBM, different locations contacting, they'd call up, who did your meeting? Who does your meetings? Oh, we have this girl in Atlanta. She does it.
So which part of your work did you enjoy most?
Coke and IBM. I enjoyed the traveling. I enjoyed the status. I think I was so well appreciated. That's the word. I was so appreciated. I felt so competent. You go there and run that meeting. I'm impressed with myself now. Like, how did I do that? But it wasn't just the programming. It was more than that. That's what I enjoyed the most. But I enjoyed the challenging, anybody can write a program to print an invoice and whatever. But the scheduling and the sausage making and the food cost and the meeting, for Coke, the general ledger included a report generator. So somebody could say, okay, this is the calculations and this is the lines and subtotals and subtotals, and they could just define their own reports. I think these things exist now. You buy them, right? But I guess I wrote it, and it worked in the end.
Did you have any interesting stories, like when somebody called you at 3 a.m. to fix some system?
No, I never had that. I did take calls from Coke, and we would get calls from people that were calling at 3 a.m. because they knew that's when we were in the office.
Right. And
we would do support remotely to Africa and Asia and wherever. No one ever called me at 3 a.m. Now, I did spend a whole night in a hotel in Atlanta because of a snowstorm.
Uh-huh.
And one of my sons was at college, so he was away. My ex was in Chicago on an IBM business trip. Mm-hmm. I was at this hotel. We were starting a meeting the next morning, and there was a problem. I could tell you what it was, but I was programming all night. There was no power in the hotel. There was no heat. I was sitting in my winter coat and everything up all night. And Barry was 16 years old. He was at home, and I called him up and I said, order pizza delivered. I'm not coming home. I guess that was the first night he spent alone. I said, I can't get home.
It's a pretty amazing career. I don't know, I like to mention this book called Proving Ground, which is about the ENIAC computer, and which was built in Philadelphia University, Pennsylvania University. And the first programmers who programmed it was 6 young women who were, working for the army during the war, doing like the calculations. And basically they got them, programmed this computer, here's the schematic. And initially they weren't even allowed to see the computer. And that was before there were CPUs and all that stuff. So actually you had to connect them via cables, and each like refrigerator size thing was an accumulator or a multiplier or some such.
Right.
And it's a fantastic story. And if you look up ENIAC picture on Google, you see these young women standing in front of this. And some people thought they were models. No, they were the first software engineers who worked on these.
So that reminds me of the movie, true story about the women, I can't remember the name of the movie, that did the calculations.
Hidden Figures.
Hidden Figures, yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
I went in and I think that sausage manufacturer was located in an old stone building where indoors you saw the stones, the big stones on the walls, that had been a dairy in past years. And the drains were still in the middle of the floor from when they were hosing out the dairy. The first program I wrote, not control panel, but program I wrote for IBM, for Deitch Dairy Company in the Bronx. It compiled and ran perfectly the first time. And I was proud of that. We got this PC, and Barry wrote a communications program to send email. He wrote all the communication software and everything, and he tried to sell it. At those days, IBM had their own stores for PCs.
Yeah, I vaguely remember.
And in the front, they would have a rack of software that were written by just ordinary people who would put it in a Ziploc bag or something. And I don't know if Barry ever tried to do that, but that was his idea. So we were a computer family.
That's very cool. All right, we can finish now.
I'm sure there's something.
You should write a book about your experiences.
I'm one of the reasons to do this was so that my kids could listen to it and hear. Although apparently they absorbed. They know more about me than I realize.
Yeah, my son also became a software engineer because of, heavy computers around the house.
So
but I started in a very similar way to you. I was a math major, and I had no idea what I wanted to do, and physics was too hard.
Data processing for me was perfect. It was. That's the way I work.
Right.
It was easy, and it was. I just loved it. I loved doing it.
Me too. Okay. Well, thank you for talking to me. And so thank you for listening to our podcast. And we'll hope to see you next time.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.